All right. Hello, everyone. I am Katie Freeman. I am unexpectedly joining you from a coat closet of a bookstore, and I'm excited to have you all here this evening. On behalf of the Mystery Writers of America, welcome to the 78th Annual Edgar Award Symposium. Tonight's discussion is with the nominees for Best Fact Crime. Our moderator is Lisa Black, and I'll be introducing her in a minute. You can learn more about Mystery Writers of America and the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2024 and by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. A reminder that the Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel, which is where you might be watching this evening, on May 1st. During tonight's discussion, I will be posting links to our panelists' fantastic books in the chat. And our featured bookstore today is Mystery Galaxy in San Diego, which is a really excellent store. Please feel free and very welcome to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them towards the end of the hour. And now to introduce our moderator. Lisa Black is a New York Times bestselling author of 18 suspense novels, including works that have been translated into 6 languages, optioned for film, the inaugural Sue Grafton Memorial Award. She is also a certified LaTeX print examiner and a certified crime scene analyst, beginning her forensics career at the coroner's office in Cleveland, Ohio, and then the police department in Cape Coral, Florida. She has spoken to readers and writers at numerous conferences and has been a consultant on Court TV and was a guest of honor at 2021 Killer Nashville. And I'm very excited to turn it over to her, and congratulations to all of our nominees. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am just thrilled to be emceeing this. I am honored. I was honored to be the chair for the Best Fact Crime Committee. And I'm definitely want to thank the Edgars and express appreciation for the Edgars, because it is a massive and important undertaking. And for my panel of judges specifically, which was Alan Weiler, Joanna Elm, Belinda Frisch, and Edward Hume. We are all volunteers. Everyone who does this is a volunteer, and I'm always volunteering thinking, woohoo, free books. And but we had 51, and it was really, really hard to narrow it down to 6. So I'm going to introduce our authors and ask them one beginning question, and then we'll be coming back with plenty of round robin questions for everyone to jump in on. First of all, Zeke Fox, who wrote Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall, cannot attend tonight. Sorry, my finger is kind of in the camera here because I have to actually hold my phone this entire time. Never mind. But anyway, Zeke Fox will not be here tonight. Kim Cross is a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and historian known for meticulously reported narrative nonfiction. In Light of All Darkness, Inside the Poly-Class Kidnapping and the Search for America's Child, dealt with the 1993 child abduction and murder, which was unusual for several reasons. Polly had been in her own home, having a sleepover with 2 other girls, with her mother and sister sleeping in another room. And the perpetrator was located by police officers, but in a different jurisdiction. So they had no knowledge of a kidnapping or description of the car and man. So, Kim, I wanted to ask, this is 30 years ago now that this occurred. So what drew you to this story?
Well, like most of my books, my stories choose me. This one, I'm not in my natural habitat in true crime, but I happen to be related to the lead investigator. The FBI agent who basically solved the case is my father-in-law. And I've been married to his son for, I don't know, 15 years when it first came up as maybe this is a book you ought to write. And it had never occurred to me. But I realized that as a journalist who loves meticulously reported narrative nonfiction, I had a skill set, and I might possibly have access that no other journalist could get because I was sort of part of the family. And so I really had unlimited access to the files of DA Greg Jacobs, and pretty much all of the investigators, about 50 total investigators, were willing to talk with me. So I thought I better do this.
Yeah, Yeah, that's a pretty sweet setup. You can't pass that up. Okay, John Glatt is an investigative journalist with more than 40 years experience. In the last 25 years, he has written 25 true crime books and 5 biographies, and he has more than 1 million books currently in print all over the world. His latest is Tangled Vines, Power, Privilege, and the Murdaugh Family Murder. Now, influential families that control a town or county and consistently worm their way out of bad behavior, up to and including murder, as in the case of the son, Paul, are such a staple of TV shows and books that it's hard to believe that could still occur in real life. So what fascinated you about this case?
Well, I think like most of America, the Murdoch story just had everything. And I couldn't believe that it was possible, you know, in the 21st century, that a family could dominate Hampton County for over 100 years in every single way. I mean, you know, they were the solicitors, they picked the politicians, the police and everything. And of course, they had their fingers in everything, you know, but it all came down to, you know, Alex Murdoch at the end, wasting it all. And the idea that you could like rip off your clients for like $11 million, and then when you're getting found out, you would actually being convicted of killing your wife and your son just to keep the family good name. It was just mesmerizing, and it was like a wild trip for 2 years working on this book, you know.
I believe it. It's just such a crazy story. Okay, Nathan Masters has hosted and produced the Los Angeles area Emmy Award-winning public television series Lost LA since 2016. His first book is Crooked, the roaring 20s tale of a corrupt attorney general, a crusading senator, and the birth of the American political scandal. So I love this book, and I can't believe it's your first, which kind of makes me not like you now. What made you decide to debut with a historical case from so long ago instead of something current and, you know, sexy like Stormy Daniels or even Chappaquiddick?
Well, as somebody who really works in history professionally, I do think there are lessons we can draw from the past. I started writing this book around 2019, and I was trying to think of precedents for presidential administrations that were plagued by corruption scandals. I came across the administration of Warren G. Harding, who's probably one of the most notoriously corrupt administrations, even if he wasn't personally corrupt, and came across the story of his attorney general / campaign manager who mentored him throughout his political career and basically was his political protector. And then when I found out that there was this senator who was investigating the attorney general for alleged crimes, and found out that the senator found himself soon in the legal crosshairs of the Department of Justice, I thought there was a killer story there that also raised relevant questions about, you know, like how do we hold those to account who seemingly are unaccountable and under the American justice system. So I thought there's a good book to tell, even if it's 2023.
Very true. There's a lot of comparisons you can make throughout history. Dr. Barbara Rae-Venter is the president and co-founder of Firebird Forensics Group, a corporation focused on assisting law enforcement with identifying suspects in violent crimes and identifying unidentified human remains. She is a retired intellectual property attorney who specialized in patenting biotechnology inventions and has a degree from the University of Texas at Austin Law School and degrees in psychology and biochemistry from the U of California in San Diego. Her book is I Know Who You Are, How an Amateur DNA Sleuth Unmasked the Golden State Killer and Changed Crime Fighting Forever. And I was ecstatic to read your book, and not just because I lecture about forensics at writers' conferences, and people kept asking me about genealogical tracing, and I couldn't answer. But you had written a number of professional papers, but unlike everyone else here, you were not a writer primarily. So what made you decide to plunge into a full-length book?
A number of reasons. One of them being that I think it's important for young women who are growing up to see that they can do a number of different things. I've reinvented myself several times over because I had a degree in biology that allowed me to do a number of different things. So I started out as a cancer researcher doing breast cancer research. From there, I switched into doing patent law. And then, of course, in my retirement, and I'll put that in quotes, I become a DNA sleuth. So I think it's important for particularly women to see that the sciences are an avenue that they can pursue and that you can do lots of different things with it.
Very interesting. It's not really what I expected you to say, but that's very interesting. And our last author, Joe Sexton, a senior editor at the New York Times and ProPublica, has directed 6 projects awarded Pulitzer Prizes, including coverage of New York Governor Eliot Spitzer's downfall. He has shared in 3 Emmy Awards for documentary film, one for a harrowing look at the reemergence of violent white supremacists in America. As a reporter, he covered sports, politics, and the country's criminal justice system. He's a lifelong resident of Brooklyn and the father of 4 daughters. His book is The Lost Sons of Omaha, 2 Young Men in an American Tragedy. Now, I have to say, I'm not a sports person, but I loved meddling about the 2002 Olympic figure skating scandal, which you broke the reporting on. And you did co-found the City Sun, a Black newspaper based in Brooklyn. But a large chunk of your work has been sports writing. So what made you decide to write about this story, which is so far from your home?
Well, my sports writing days are in the rearview mirror quite a bit. I often tend to introduce myself as a recovering sports writer. There are many great formative skills you can develop as a sports writer, but it's also a soul-crushing enterprise. So, as a lifelong newspaperman, right, I was the lone white reporter at the City Sun in Brooklyn, New York, a startup Black weekly in 1984. I spent 25 years at the New York Times. Started as a sports writer and had the good fortune and good privilege to become a city reporter and then an editor. I ran the Metropolitan desk for 5 years, and then the sports desk for another 2 years, and spent 8 great years at ProPublica, a nonprofit investigative news outfit in New York. And I like to tell the birth of my book as a classic newspaper anecdote, which is, whether you worked at the New York Times with 1,700 people in the newsroom, or you worked at the City Sun with 4 people in your newsroom, all sort of news enterprises are kept alive and driven day in, day out by a sense of desperation, right? Do we have enough fucking stories for tomorrow's paper? And so on a Thursday in July in 2020, I got a call from the editor-in-chief at ProPublica, and he was very worried that we didn't have something to publish on the following Tuesday, but he had heard about a racial killing in Omaha, Nebraska, and it looked like a white supremacist that killed a young African-American kid and gotten away with murder, and could I turn that around for Tuesday's publishing haul? So 3 years later, that Tuesday came and went, but I was able to dive into the story, and it consumed much of my life for the next 3 years, and turned out to be a lot more complicated than it was initially pitched to me. So out of desperation, classic newspaper desperation, came my first and likely only book. And I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm happy, that you guys invited me.
Okay. Well, that somewhat leads me into my next question for all of you. If we can just go around the circle, or whoever, I'll let you guys decide what order you want to go in. Other than Barbara and Nathan, everyone here is a journalist. So what made you think books instead of articles? And Nathan, what made you think book instead of film? So let's go back to Kim. Let's start with Kim again. We'll go in the same order.
Okay, thanks. I've always wanted to write books. I've worked in newspapers, magazines, online websites, and I've bounced around my whole career, but books have always been my my first love. And I think it's that sense of losing yourself in a story. I remember the first literary nonfiction book I ever read was Krakauer's Into Thin Air. And I remember at the time, I think I was in high school or college, and I thought, I don't even know what this genre is called, but I feel like I'm on the mountain. I feel like I'm immersed in the story. And I wanted to write books that made you feel that way. Unfortunately, I bounced around with all of my books from topic to topic. So I'll do a great job of building an audience, and then I pivot and start from scratch over again. So it's not the best business model, but it's really, really fun because you get to really live in a story world for a while and immerse yourself and hopefully bring the reader on that journey.
Very cool. And John, why did you decide a book instead of series of articles for the Murdaugh murders?
Well, I think the Murdaugh murders demanded a book. I mean, there's been a few of them out there. I was probably the first, but there's been a lot of other ones. And I mean, it's just such a huge landscape to cover. I mean, a series of articles would, and it's an ongoing process. I mean, for 2 years, every time I got up in the morning, something new had broken. There was another fresh indictment or anything. And I literally had to expand my bedroom. This is where I work. And I had to get new furniture for the files because I was just amounting so much information and everything. So, I mean, I think it was definitely a book. I mean, I started working as a journalist in the 70s in England and came over to America. So I was a journalist for many, many years. And I wrote my first book in 93, which was actually Bill Graham, the official biography of Bill Graham. And I've sort of gone from there. And as Lisa said, I just like losing myself, in a book, there's nothing like it.
Very, very true. Very true. So Nathan, what made you think book instead of film?
Yeah, well, I usually work in TV, and unfortunately, I'm limited to 26-minute, 40-second episodes, which are that's quite a constraint. The story of to be able to bring alive the world of Jazz Age Washington and tell the story of a corruption scandal and a Senate investigation of that, you need a lot more space to do that. And I do want to echo, of course, what John and Kim said, that there's something special about immersing yourself in a story for several years, and working on it on your own for a long time too, right? Which is for me, I usually have, I have a great team that helps me put these episodes together, but to be able to work on the book alone is quite satisfying.
True. Yeah, that's very true. Okay, well, Joe explained why he went to a book, but Barbara, do you think you'll write more books now that you've delved into this world?
I'm not sure. It was quite the effort to put together a book, and I really only got into it because I would give presentations starting back after I'd done my first case, which was back in 2015. And I would have people come up to me afterwards and say, I was sitting on the edge of my seat listening to this, and then other people would say they would have nightmares after they'd listened to some of the details of these cases. And so many people would say, you really should write a book about some of these cases that you've worked on. And so it was an interesting experience to go through it. I'm not sure if I could do it again.
Well,
Okay.
the honest answer for me is I never much wanted to write a book. The whole idea of it scared the bejesus out of me. I never thought I had the talent or the discipline to do it. But an odd set of circumstances, I had been developing the story of what happened in Omaha as a piece for ProPublica, and I wound up leaving ProPublica in the spring of 2021, and they allowed me to take that material with me. And so at the tender age of 61, I said, well, perhaps I should get an agent. That might be a wise thing. So I did, and I showed him the piece and that I had written. It was sort of a magazine-length piece. And he said, well, you should really do it as a book. And I completely freaked out. But I said, look, I trust you. You know what you're doing. So we turned the magazine piece into a book proposal. And I was scheduled to go on a reporting trip to North Africa. And he said, well, you want me to send this out to publishers before you go or when you get back? And I said, well, you go ahead and do it before we go. What the hell? And so myself and 3 others were on a reporting trip in Libya in May of 2021, and we wound up being kidnapped and held for 6 days, and the whole ugly playbook of such things, gunpoint, abduction, forced interrogations, the having to sign, false confessions, proof of life videos. But my favorite part of it was before we had been abducted in Tripoli, I had gotten an email from the agent. He said, "Oh, Knopf would very much like to talk to you about your book proposal. And do you have internet in Libya?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you're reaching me on my email. So of course I have internet." He said, "Well, could you do a Zoom call on Monday?" And I said, "Yeah, sounds great." And so we were abducted Sunday night. And I never made the Zoom call, but I am tickled to this day that, here's this big editor at Knopf, here's this agent who I've just met like a month ago, and they're sitting on a Zoom call going, "Where the fuck is this guy Joe? Who does he think he is? Like, what a prima donna. Like, he couldn't even give us an email that he wasn't going to make it." So anyway, we all made it home safely thanks to the U.S. State Department and the efforts of our families. But, and I, of course, called my agent when I finally landed at JFK. And he said, "Well, that's a pretty good excuse."
Yeah.
I was forgiven. But I do believe the only reason I said yes to writing a book was when I got back, he said, "Well, there's 7 major American publishing houses that want to talk to you about it." And I was still in sort of an altered state from our experience, because I don't think I ever would have had the actual personal courage to have said yes. But in this kind of, fevered, altered state, I said, "Oh yeah, hell, let's write a book." So that's the story.
That is not at all funny, but I just have to chuckle trying to picture.
I embrace the comedy of it now.
I'm just picturing you trying to explain to these Libyans. It's like, "No, you don't understand. I have to call my publisher."
Can you take the blindfold off? Just so I can, see my
just a quick Zoom call, 10 minutes. That's all I need. Okay. Well, my next question is, you all have to do massive research for true crime, obviously. That is the one advantage. I would love to write true crime, is my true ambition in life. But so at the moment I'm in fiction, which is, you can just make it up as you go along. But you obviously have to research a whole lot. So what is your biggest research technique? Let's go back and start with Kim again. But what do you use, would you say, the most? Other books, journalism products, interviews, Google, court records?
Oh my gosh, all of it. And I love, I'm really a nerd about having systems, organizational systems, because all of my book projects involve massive amounts of different types of sources. So I'm a big fan of spreadsheets where I like to have an index of everything I have. I think I did more than 350 interviews for this book, and I had 12,000 pages of court transcripts that I read multiple times. And I had files of physical police documents and police reports that were squirreled away in attics and given to me by detectives who had just kept them for 30 years. And I had some books, and I had some videos. And so I like to have, I guess, what's called an index, where at some point you gather so much that you can't hold it all in your head. You can't remember what you have. And so I like to have something where I can look at it at a glance and see what I have, and have it sorted in chronological order and a timeline. And then also, stand back and look for patterns in the timeline. So my 800 line long timeline is color coded. So I'm able to see patterns that inform the structure. So I could go on, but I'm really a geek about this stuff. But I do think that having that system really helps you when you do sit down, not have your head explode because you have more than you could possibly hold in your head. And so if it's kind of like in a place where you can look it up and you can look at one thing at a time, I think that's that's kind of how I do it.
That makes a lot of sense. So John, what's your go-to research technique?
Well, I totally relate to Kim on this. I mean, I'm a pack rat when it comes to getting as much information as possible. I want to talk to as many people. I always go down to the scene of the crime and talk to as many people as I can, do as much research with newspaper cuttings, but the timeline, I think, is the key. I mean, I'm very, very anal about it, you know, and with the Murdoch book, I think I had 250 pages of single-space timeline. And for me, that was the only way to make sense of what you've got. And occasionally, I mean, you get these things converging on a certain day, which you wouldn't have realized before if you hadn't got a methodical timeline, which for me is one of the great enjoyments of doing it. So I would say my timeline is my secret weapon, but not so secret if many other people do it.
Okay. Nathan, what did you find to be the most helpful research technique?
Well, I mean, yeah, I was nodding my head when Kim and John were talking about the timeline. That's just the best tool in any true crime writer's toolkit. But you know, the events of my story took place 100 years ago, so you know, interviews were out of the question. Thankfully, there was a you know, the heart of my story is a Senate investigation into abuse of power at the DOJ. Thankfully, there was a 3,300-page transcript of that investigation. But then I really made liberal use of archival resources. So I went to the National Archives, looked through the Justice Department records to really find out what was going on, what wasn't reported at the time, what was happening internally at the Senate and at the Department of Justice. It was the archives for me that really helped me ground the story in detail.
Very cool. And Barbara, what I imagine your research is a little different. But what did you use the most in writing this book?
So the book actually pretty much came from my case notes. Those, of course, are, you know, heavily researched in the sense that the person that we're trying to identify using DNA, we're digging into the background of all of the people who share DNA with that person. So a lot of research using things like being verified and some of those kinds of tools. Facebook, we can build entire family trees from the amount of information people put in Facebook. Newspaper articles, less so the police reports. The police reports inform us in terms of if we're trying to figure out maybe how old the person is, so we can come up with a birthday. So we sort of pick through police reports looking for any kind of information that can inform us as to what the person might look like, how old they are, that kind of thing. And then, yeah, I mean, for the overall structure of the book, absolutely, timeline was important because we were structuring it very much around, you know, what happened at various time points related to using the DNA.
Very cool. And Joe, what's your go-to research technique?
Well, it maybe doesn't surprise you since you've gotten to know me over the last 15 minutes or whatever, but I'm gonna propose a certain kind of heresy. First off, I stand in nothing but admiration and awe of my fellow authors here and the amount of work and research and organizational talent they've brought to their projects. But as somebody who has managed reporters for many, many years, I often tell them, you know, do not over-report your story. And it sounds, you know, kind of reckless or, you know, like I said, maybe heretical. But I think reporters over-report their stories. And so when I decided to do a book and I was in this sort of panicked state about what I had just chosen to bite off, I forced myself to keep it simple. You know, there was a compelling story right in front of me. It had a natural kind of arc of tension and velocity. And so, you know, I just pledged to myself that I was not going to overthink it or over-report it. In a perverse point of pride, I turned in my first book 4 months before the 1-year deadline for it. That may actually be reflected in the quality of the book, but we'll keep that secret to ourselves. But for me, you know, the story at its heart was, you know, in the days after George Floyd's killing, there were protests in cities around the country. Omaha was no different. There had been several nights of riots and protests in Omaha. And in the course of one of them, a white ex-Marine bar owner winds up shooting to death a young African-American kid who was there protesting. So, you know, I could do all the research in the world, I might have, but I could not write a book unless I gained the cooperation of those two families. And they had no reason necessarily to trust me. And they each were aware that I was working with the other family
Mhm.
whom they blamed for the death of their child.
Right.
So for me, the greatest research effort was just an act of reporting and an act of you know, persuading these two families to trust me enough to tell the stories of their two sons.
Interesting. Okay. I have some more specific questions for each person, so I'm going to hit those right now. Back to Kim. This case, the polyclass case, caused several changes in the way cases are investigated, but the segmented communication, you know, led the police in another jurisdiction, you know, meeting the suspect and then letting him go because they had no knowledge that this crime had even occurred. And, you know, he had way more than 3 strikes against him. He'd been in and out of jail. And also the way juvenile witnesses are questioned had to be reevaluated. So what do you see as the biggest change to come out of the polyclass case? And if you can comment, what do you think still needs to be changed?
Well, I'd like to talk about the first question, which is, you know, what is the legacy? And one of the things that I found so interesting about this case is that, you know, in 1993, it was the first major case of the first FBI evidence response team in the country. It was a really major change in the FBI, where before this case, forensic investigators would be flown out from DC to the crime scene. And in the day or two or amount of time it took them to get to the crime scene, trace evidence would disappear or be spoiled. And so there was this new concept bubbling up from the ranks where agents were realizing we need to get to the crime. We need little localized teams, little like forensic SWAT teams that could get very quickly to the crime scene and start gathering trace evidence before it disappears. And so this idea had bubbled up from the ranks in San Francisco. And I was so excited to be able to talk to the very agents who had to, you know, come up with a plan and sell it to headquarters. And the FBI was at that time, and probably still is, a very top-down institution. And so it that didn't usually go over well. So they had to convince not only headquarters, but other agents that this was a new way of doing business, as one of them put it. And so this was the first team that formed, and this was their first major case. And it also gave them a chance to test and prove the use of brand new forensic technologies that hadn't been used before. So alternate light source and fluorescent powder had never really been used. The FBI didn't even own an alternate light source, now forensic light, and they had it on loan. And so after this case, they bought one for, you know, offices nationwide. And so the decentralization of forensic investigation, I think that was a big change. The adoption of new techniques, the realization that you can't treat child witnesses like you treat adult witnesses. The girls who witnessed Polly's kidnapping, Kate and Jillian, were 12, and they were subject to increasingly harsh interviews that became more like interrogations. And you just don't do that. And today we have child and adolescent forensic interviewers who have training to work with kids. So I'll stop there and give someone else a chance to talk.
Okay. John, I wanted to ask, you tend to write about crime, but family crime. I mean, you write about Lori Vallow, the Turpin children, Chris Watts, Tommy Gilbert. Why do you choose those crimes rather than cases about organized crime or political scandal?
Well, I think that fascinates me. What makes a father kill their daughters, or a mother kill their son, and things like that. And I mean, each of them are all very different. I mean, the Lori Vallow case, which in fact I've been watching today, Chad Daybell went on trial, and the opening arguments yesterday. And this is a fascinating case with the whole Mormon thing, with the murders and everything. And I really got in. That was another case that I got really involved with Totally. And I just find it fascinating, the dynamics that make people do what they do and commit murder. I find that more fascinating than maybe organized crime and things like that. But on a personal level, trying to relate to why people are doing what they're doing. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't try and explain it, but I try and report what happened. So to me, that is the crux of it. And the Murdoch thing really had it, this family that, I mean, they reigned supreme. They were like the Kennedys of South Carolina in more ways than one, but not as ostentatious as the Kennedys. They kept it low key. And then you've got Alex Murdoch, who, started flaunting his wealth and making people very, very upset about it. And that was one of the downfalls, So, I mean, I think this family dynamic is something that really fascinates me. And it's a thread, you're right, that runs through a lot of my books.
Cool. And so, Nathan, what I loved about your book was that the political machinations of the 1920s, does not necessarily sound like riveting reading, at least, me, but this really was. I mean, I didn't want to put it down. I also kept picking up familiar references to the show Boardwalk Empire. Did you watch that? In which Harding played a part in that. And then my husband ran out of daytime TV, so he's rewatching Boardwalk Empire all over again from beginning to end. Anyway, was it hard when you were writing the book to avoid making comparisons to present day politics? I mean, was that a temptation, or?
I mean, it was in some ways without making the connections explicit. It was part of the point of writing the book. But no, I did try to ground the whole story in the politics of the 1920s and tell a story about how the political world that we live in today, and especially the world of political scandal, that was really born then in the 1920s, right? With the rise of mass media, the rise of radio, the rise of syndicated newspapers, tabloid newspapers. For the first time, the entire country could follow along in real time as a political scandal unfolded in Washington. And so I was interested in telling that story, and I think I more or less tried to let the readers draw their own connections to the present day. But of course, it was always at the back of my mind.
True. When we started back to Boardwalk Empire, don't ask me to keep bringing that up. But when we started watching it, my husband and I are from Cleveland, and there had just been a big break in there that the county treasurer and the county auditor or something had been for like 30 years worth of corruption, and they were finally exposed, and it was a huge thing in Cleveland. But we started watching Boardwalk Empire and how Nucky Thompson had his hand in everything, and I turned to my husband and said, nothing has changed.
Right.
That's exactly what was happening in Cleveland in 2010. But so that's always there.
And you mentioned Boardwalk Empire. I should mention that I was actually watching that series, and then as soon as some of the characters in my book started creeping into the series, I actually shut it down because I did not want the fact and fiction to enter. And there's also a Gore Vidal book, Hollywood, which is about Harry Doherty and all these characters. They also have assiduously avoided that book. Hopefully, I'll get to it someday, though.
Oh, true. Okay. And Barbara, I had so many of these cases create precedents for future investigation, but I imagine a lot has changed about genealogical tracing and law enforcement's access to it since you found Joseph DeAngelo. Not because of that, but over the past couple of years, I believe, law enforcement used to be able to upload their unidentified samples to 23andMe, and then since then there's been restrictions on doing that. So what's the current state sort of law enforcement using genealogical tracing databases?
So it's actually never been possible to upload to either Ancestry or to 23andMe. Both of those companies require a spit sample. The companies that you can upload to and were able to upload to were the ones that did buccal swabs. So if you're doing a cheek swab, you could then send in the sample. But if you had to spit in a tube, then you couldn't. There was no way to get a sample into the companies that required spit. So originally there were no restrictions. The main site that was being used for doing genealogical research was a third-party site called GEDmatch. GEDmatch itself doesn't do any DNA testing. It was set up to allow people who had tested at various companies. So if you would get tested at 23andMe, your cousin had tested Ancestry, you couldn't see how you matched each other. And so GEDmatch was set up to allow you to do that. So you could download your DNA profile from wherever you had tested, upload to GEDmatch, and then you could see how you matched with your various cousins. So it gave a way of doing that. So when we started out, we uploaded to GEDmatch, and then another site which uses bugle swaps, which was Family Tree DNA. And so we uploaded there. And then when we didn't get very good matches with Joseph D'Angelo's sample, at those two sites, I had an account at MyHeritage, and MyHeritage is another company which did testing with bugle swaps. And so we then uploaded there, and that's of course when we were able to actually finally get to the point where we could actually solve the case. After it became public, how we had actually solved those cases, MyHeritage changed their terms of service to then prohibit uploads by law enforcement. So the current status is that the only two sites that we can actually use are Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. And we've never been able to use Ancestry or 23andMe.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's unfortunate because those are two of the bigger databases. So there are something like 30 million people in the database for Ancestry, somewhere around 20 million for 23andMe. The two databases that we can use, they're down around 2 million. So it would be huge if we could actually use other databases, because this is a numbers game.
True, very true, true. Okay, Joe, you made a documentary about white supremacists among so many other things, and this may sound like a stupid question, but was it scary writing about something so controversial? Did you like kick up your home security system, or do you screen your mail for anthrax or anything like that? I mean, I'm a complete wimp who avoids conflict at all costs, so it sounds terrifying to me to jump into a topic that polar.
Well, I'll just mention on the Boardwalk Empire. So I've been friends with Steve Buscemi for 45 years or whatever. So maybe I'll get him to come as my guest to the event on May 1st, and we could all have a Boardwalk Empire celebration. Anyway, the truth of the work on white supremacists is that I did none of the really brave stuff. I was an editor, and a really truly fabulous and quite brave reporter named A.C. Thompson, who is at ProPublica, did all of the tough and dangerous work, and paid a fairly heavy price. He was swatted at home. It's a term now, unfortunately, we've all probably become familiar with, where a false call is made to 911. So he was Frog walked out of his family home in front of his wife and kids at gunpoint from police. He was the focus of a murder plot by one of the white supremacist groups he had written about. Thankfully, he has survived and done well, but he deserves all the credit for that. There was a sensitive on the book I actually did wind up writing. The social media narrative of what had happened was that a white supremacist had killed this young African-American 22-year-old. And any book that was going to actually propose that there might be a more nuanced version of events, and that the white protagonist culprit might actually not be evil incarnate, his Trump allegiance notwithstanding. So there was a certain amount of trepidation about whether I was really willing to write a book in which you would kind of try to ask American readers to put aside their sort of passionately felt, and understandably so, political beliefs and suspicions, and actually, open themselves up to a more empathetic understanding of the history of what happened in Omaha that night.
Right. Okay, well, unfortunately, we're running a little bit short on time. I mean, we're not running short on time, but I need to keep an eye on that. So I have two more sets of questions that we want to address briefly. And first of all, I want to ask everyone, what is your writing system? Do you have a strict schedule? Do you binge write? Do you closet yourself for a weekend and churn out 60,000 words? Or do you have to write between 7 and 9 every single morning? And so let's just go around quickly and tell me something about your writing style. Kim?
I'm at my desk every day between 7 and 9, and I treat it like a full-time job. But to do this, I had to go on writing retreats, and I would lock myself up in a small cabin in the mountains of Idaho, where my break would be I'd have to go chop wood because it's a wood-burning stove kind of cabin, and I had a target of about 2,000 words a day to get it done on time, and it was very bad for my mental health, this book. But I'm really glad it's done and it's out there, because hopefully I think it can be used to continue saving lives. But that's my system.
Okay, well, the cabin sounds perfect. John, what's your system?
Well, I'm very much a 9-to-5 guy, actually, writing, but my target is 2,000 words a day. And I try to make that. And if I go over, which is great, it's even better. But I'm really like, much of my time is spent researching, of course. So that's very, very different. So you need to have discipline with that. But something I've learned over the years.
Cool. Nathan, what about you?
Yeah, I'm in awe of the 2,000 words a day. I don't think I can get there most days, but I started writing this book right after my first kid was born, and I finished it right before the second one was born. And I know that might sound like a horrible time to write a book, but I actually found that having limited time to work on it was quite focusing. So I just took whatever hours I got. Thankfully, we had a lot of help with my in-laws and childcare.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Barbara, what was your writing style for this book?
So I'm not really a writer. So what I should talk about is what I do for my research, which is sort of, I guess, like Kim. I get up in the morning and I work on a case for whatever number of hours that I can work on it. Sometimes that can be as many as 12 or 14 hours. I need to set alarms to make myself go and do things that I need to do, like going to a dentist appointment or meeting a friend for lunch. I'm very much a night owl, so I tend to work very late at night. I would not be the person who's getting up early in the morning to do stuff. So a little bit of a different lifestyle.
Okay. And Joe, what's your writing style?
Well, I had a thought and then I lost it, but forgive me, because it was actually a fairly entertaining story. So as a lifelong newspaper person, right, you've spent your entire career begging for more words, right? Like, I can't possibly write this story in fewer than 1,200 words or whatever. It's just unthinkable, right? And then as an editor in the newspaper world, all you hear are reporters bitching, like, I need more words, right? I must have 800 words for this story. And then somebody tells you, oh, here, you can have 100,000 words. And rather than, be, jumping with joy and enjoying the prospect of such liberty and length, and it filled me with absolute dread. I thought, how in God's name am I ever going to get to 100,000 words? I wish I never asked for an extra word in a story for my entire life. So it became quite a psychological problem for me. But it sounds like many of us have come up with at least a target solution, which is I did get up every day, and as a lifelong reporter, right? Or, you bang out 800-word stories like nothing. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to get up and write 1,000 words every day. And I did. I literally did it. And 2 months later, I was at 60,000 words. And I thought, oh my God, I might actually do this.
That's my system, word count. I live by word count. But then again, I'm writing fiction and I can just make it up. So, it's really kind of a different thing. Now, one very important question. What is next for you? What are you guys working on? Let's go back around. Kim, what's your next project?
Once again, I'm pivoting completely. It is a mother-son journey from source to sea through the science of salmon and dams.
Okay, I think we need a little explanation about that.
So I live in Idaho, and we are on the brink of losing our salmon runs. One of the great keystone species that knits together ecosystems from the orca off the coast to the mountains of Idaho. And we are, scientists have been saying for 20 years that they are, we're going to lose them unless we can bring down 4 dams on the lower Snake River. And so it's a really massively complicated issue, which of course I love, involving, tribal treaty rights and agricultural shipping down the Snake River using barges and, farmers getting their grain to market, to international market from the Port of Lewiston, and fishermen and tribes. And I mean, it's complicated. So my narrative vehicle is a source to sea journey. And I'm 5 years in now. My book projects overlap. So I get to go to Alaska this summer, so.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. And John, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm trying to do something different, and I'm trying to do historical true crime. And I found a very, very interesting crime that took part in London in 1967 during, the Summer of Love. There was a murder. It was dubbed the first LSD murder. And in fact, it happened in Kings Road, Chelsea. I lived down the road, actually. And I was a 15-year-old schoolboy when it happened. I didn't know about it at the time, but I'm an insomniac, and I found it about 2 years ago, and I've been obsessed with it. And I'm trying to write that at the moment and really up into research with it. And it's a very, very interesting story, I think.
Cool. Very cool. And Nathan, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm writing what I guess you could call as a natural follow-up to it, although it takes place about 40 years later. I mean, one of the great ironies of the book is that a senator's crusade to clean up the Justice Department results in the rise of J. Edgar Hoover as the head of the FBI. So I'm looking at a series of crimes about 40 years later that mark a big turning point in the FBI's history.
Do you have another baby on the way, though?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. And Barbara, what are you working on now? Or just you?
Well, I'm continuing to work on all of my cases. I've now solved around 70 or 80 cases. But you had asked the question about whether or not I have another book in me. And one that I had been toying with the idea of doing is a friend in the UK has been helping me research my father's wartime history. So my father was a Spitfire pilot during World War II, and he was shot down over France, and then he ended up in actually the camp that they made the movie The Great Escape about, Stalingrad 3. And so I was on a trip to London, and my friend and I went to the National Archives there and started researching my father's military history. And it was absolutely fascinating. We actually came across, these are original documents, they're not copies. We found the original letter from Churchill to Roosevelt requesting the use of an aircraft carrier. And this was actually the very first use of an American ship in World War II. And what they wanted it for was, my father had been given orders to go to Malta to help lift the siege of Malta. And so he was actually, it turns out, the lead pilot on this. But anyway, they were able to borrow an aircraft carrier. And so there were 80 Spitfires then got loaded onto this aircraft carrier. And Of course, these guys have never taken off from an aircraft carrier. And what they're going to have to do is they're going to, because of all the U-boat activity, they were going to only be able to go so far towards Malta, and then they were going to have to fly the rest of the way. And so they were all going to have to take off from this carrier. And so the documents that we found all relate to, first of all, then this whole operation, I forget what the name of the operation was. And then all of the documents on when my father's camp was actually liberated. Of course, the Russians were coming in to start liberating all the camps. And so the Germans then did a forced march in the middle of winter with all of the pilots who were in Stadler 3. And so we found all of the documents, I mean, just incredible documentation of where they were going. So I've sort of been toying with the idea of maybe doing a sequel to my father's book. He did a book himself when he was in his 80s. He had his logbook, and so he actually used that as a memory jog. And so he has a book called Kiwi Spitfire Ace. So what we would do is write this as a sequel to my father's book. So it's kind of in the blue sky at the moment. So that would be something that I might think about doing.
Very neat. That's very neat. And Joe, what are you working on now?
I had actually a couple of TV and film projects. One is a true crime documentary we're doing for HBO that should air in 2024 about a murder case out in Topeka, Kansas, and it implicates a major American news organization in perhaps having sent an innocent woman away for 100 years. And then, when my daughter Lucy and I have four girls, and in an odd bit of dark coincidence, when I was taken overseas in Libya, she was actually the story producer on a 4-part series for HBO dealing with the Iran hostage crisis of 1979. So she had been spending months interviewing hostage families and survivors and the actual Iranian abductors of the embassy staff in 1979. And so when she found out I had been taken overseas, or at least gone missing, she was actually in Washington, D.C., conducting an interview with a guy named Roger Carstens, who is America's top hostage negotiator. And she was interviewing him for the documentary on Iran. And she asked to speak to him afterwards and said, "Hey, I think my dad's been taken." And he told her, "Oh, yes, we're on it." She and I wrote a piece together for the Atavist magazine. And we're in discussions now to have that perhaps turned into a limited TV series. So the improbable as it sounds, I'll be on TV. Oh my God. Lock yourself up. Lock yourselves up.
Well, that's very, very cool. That's just amazing coincidences there.
Yes, no, it's quite remarkable.
Yes. Well, this has been amazing. I really appreciate all of you participating, and I loved all your books, and I really enjoyed being a judging chair. And thank you for being here. And to everyone who's watching, join us next Tuesday, April 16th, for a conversation with the nominees for Best First Novel by an American Author. You can find out more by visiting mysterywriters.org and tune in to the live broadcast of the awards ceremony on May 1st. Thanks again to everybody for being here.
Well, I hope to see everyone May 1st.
See you then.
Looking forward.